And this is the not too young to run session. Um, it has to do with the question: will young people in government actually change anything? And Nafisa, you're welcome. You're welcome, Nafisa. We're
Hi.
just about to start before you joined us. Hi, Nafisa. My also here as well.
Hello, Mr. Mark.
The name is actually Dabesaki.
Okay.
Nafisa.
Nice to see you too.
Okay. Let's just go to the thick of the matter. Now, so without much ado, we had much conversation about young people being involved in government at various levels. Particularly for me, I'd even I'd been involved, add more emphasis on young people participating at the grassroots level, because practically at the grassroots level, there is a lot of disinterest, there's a lot of disenchantment with what is going. You ask a typical Nigerian who is local government or councillor is, he practically would not be able to answer. All of us seems to be aiming at the top. But beyond that, even at other level of government, there had been conversation on getting them involved and so on. But beyond that as well, if you go back to history, you realize that most of our leaders in the 60s and the 70s, even in the 80s, were considerably young. Even in early 2003, 7, some of the guys that are running the affairs now were considerably young as at then. Some of them were in their 30s and so on. So the question is, at a point in time, young people were piloting the affairs of this country. And then at that time, they have greater latitude to actually influence change, because you cannot compare the latitude you have when you're a military person to the kind of latitude you have when you are when you're in a democracy. So comparing that with now, what changed happened? Something must have happened for we to be canvassing for young people's inclusion in government. But beyond inclusion in government, the question then remains that, are they going to be able to impact or make direct influence if we are agreeing that what happened back then in the 80s and 70s was a considerable level of influence? Let me start from Debasaki.
Yeah, thank you very much. So a couple of things actually from me before I respond to your question about changes in time. The topic of this section actually makes a number of assumptions, and I want to just see if I can clarify them. The first one is about government. So when we talk about government, to my mind, there are two different segments of government. So you have government in terms of the government bureaucracy, which is more the civil service, the ones that run the government, actually the advisors and decision makers, and the ones that put forward the key policy recommendations that are approved. So that's one layer of government. And then we have political leadership, which are the people who are typically elected or people who are appointed to political office. So I want to just make sure that that distinction is, is clear. If we are focused on, on political leadership as the key, focus of this conversation, then I guess in some sense the question about changes, to my mind, raises also a number of things. It makes assumptions that there are things that need to change, right? So in some sense, I kind of think about it in two ways. The first is to think about, what can change pragmatically in terms of political governance and the outcomes of political governance. And then the other level is to look at what can change in terms of values. So if I keep it focused pragmatically, I think these are the things that we confront every day, right? The things that we have to deal with in the terms of having visionary political leadership, one that actually can think about the future and forecast about the future and look at potential economic scenarios and plan towards them. So all of those pragmatic changes that need to happen, to move the country forward. And if I stay here for a little bit, I actually think that this is the of advancement in our society. The second that I can think about is in terms of political leadership that is willing to make investments in social development, and actually taking it a step further, social development that is well planned, that is well thought out, that is not ad hoc in nature. Because again, we subscribe to all of these ideas. It's possible to say that we have actually been actively investing in political development, in social development, in terms of social services to people, education, investment, health investment, and what have you. What may be lacking is that we haven't systematically invested in these things. So in terms of thinking about political change, I'm actually thinking, what type of leadership could contribute to social outcomes. And then I'll just run through the other ones. Thinking about political development in terms of entrenching democratic culture, to strengthen those institutions that are democratic practice in our society. Again, the whole question of polarization and the way in which the practice of individual political leaders actually actively weaken our political institutions. And then the final thing that I wanted to talk about is the question of presence. So I think, obviously, the more young people we have in political office, the more presence we have. And there's a fairly well-established theory of political science around the idea of presence. And if there's time, I will talk a little bit about, descriptive and substantive representations and how those are ways of thinking about presence, And again, so is that a form of change? Of course, that's a form of change because you have more people in political office. Case has been made for women, obviously, over the last 50 years or more. And so there's a well-established literature in terms of thinking about, presence, in political space. Just two last things, and then I'll stop. I'll respond to your question. Just in terms of around values, and I think these are things that we've talked about over and over again. Leadership that is based on empathy, that understands that, leadership is responsive, responsible, answerable to the population. And so just thinking about, what kind of change do we want? We want change. We want change in the direction of political leadership that thinks of itself as being responsible to the citizenry and answerable to the citizenry and accountable to the citizenry. And then thinking about, political leadership in terms of, being engaged with the citizenry and, making sure that policymaking is one that, has active connection with the aspirations of citizens. Now, what has changed? Obviously, the difference between a democratic era and a military era is that, military obviously has fiat. They can, they have a absolute say. You have a democratic system. A democratic system is based on the idea of seeking ways to build consensus, and often you see the tensions between the executive and the military and the legislature, because in order for the executive to be actually effective in its work, it needs some consensus with the legislature. And in order to reach that position of consensus, often compromises have to be made. And so because, in some sense, then, it makes things slower to achieve. It makes things, a bit more difficult to achieve than would have been the case in a period where you have absolute say. Unfortunately, our military political leadership did not effectively use the moment where individuals had absolute say for the advancement of the country, as opposed to other places where you would have seen that dictatorial leadership actually contributed in some way to political advancement. And again, this has been extensively written about and debated in some of the literature that exists. Sorry if I've taken a bit more time.
No problem. Thank you for that intro. And one thing I also want to clarify is that, Mark, are you saying that we can as well erase that history of when we had most of our leaders falling into the category of young people, that, okay, they did not start a process that could have evolved into a more institutionalized young people engagement in politics today, that which probably necessitated why we're starting from the beginning again.
So if I understand your question, I think the one thing that I would say is that, again, back to the debate on democracy versus dictatorship, I think, the argument is that there is no instance in which a dictatorship would be preferred to a democratic system.
No doubt about it.
So in some sense, I think, if one were to stick with that conversation, then, the question is, do you want a benevolent dictator, or do you want a democratic system that allows citizens to be able to effectively engage, to raise their voices, to be able to raise the issues that not in any instance advocate, a dictatorship, because I think there are many cons to a dictatorship. Even if in the literature it can be argued in some sense that there might have been advantages of having dictatorships in the cases where those dictators were visionary dictators that had the good of the people at heart. It's difficult to be able to say that, a dictatorship is preferred. So I'm not going to try to people did when they were in government, because I don't think that's my place. What I would say is that in any given moment, it's always preferable to have a system of government in which the citizens would have a say and be able to project, their aspirations in the ways that policies are formulated.
Thanks so much for that. You're welcome, Mr. Jude. You're welcome. Good afternoon, if you can hear us. Can you hear us? Good afternoon. I'm not sure I can hear you. I don't know if the Basaki can hear you.
Jude, we can't hear you. No, still not.
Still not. So we'll wait for you to fix
Maybe
the problem.
Try to unmute your mic.
I think his mic is on mute.
Oh.
Okay. Okay. Nafisa, so you heard what the Basaki said. Why exactly do you think we need young people in government in the real sense of it? Why exactly do you think that we should be part of this conversation? Do you think the electorate would vote a young man because he's a young man? Do you understand? So what exactly do you think? Why exactly that? Obviously, it's not something we've not debated about. It's something that fundamentally we well talked about in the literature and the likes of it. But in the real sense of it, can we have a conversation about that? Why exactly do you think that we need young people in government?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you, Mr. Osman, for the question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, awesome, great. So I'm just going to use a word or a phrase as it is, and I'm just going to say inclusiveness. And I'm going to approach the conversation the same way in which we approach the issue of having women in politics in itself. Young people form a significant part of the demographic, the population that we have in this country. And it will be a huge disservice that population is not, their interests, aspirations are not reflected in the policy and in the approach the government takes as regards the interests of the nation. It's simple. If you do not have, if you do not have young people at the table able to articulate what they need at this phase in their lives, it's not going to be considered. It's not going to be reflected in the policies or the laws that the government is going to put into place. The same argument we have for women in office. If they are not given a seat at the table, their interests are not also going to be recognized. So we practice a democratic system of government. So let's get it right. One of the primary characteristics of a democratic government is inclusiveness. And you can't say that you practice inclusiveness when a huge part of your population is not included in the decision-making table. The same argument can be made even for people of disabilities, women, etc. So it is important. It is really, really important for the sustainable development of our nation, because we can't have one generation being recycled over and over and over again and being put in leadership positions, why would you not? Where's the place for mentorship? Where's the place for discipleship? Where's the place when they are dead and gone? We are still going to need people to take up the mandate of the leadership of this country. So why are we not allowing the younger generation to be trained or to be given an opportunity to lead, so that when their generation has passed away, we have a set and a crop of credible leadership? So, I definitely think young people in government is something that we should push for, we should consider. And yes, I believe it is coming to a time where we don't just vote people because they are young. No, that would be a wrong perspective on which to vote a leader into office. We vote people, a young person, because they are competent, they are credible, they have a set of values, and they have integrity. That is the person, not just because they are young. So that's my answer.
Mark distinguish two things for us, which is so if we're talking about young people inclusion in governance, let's be clear about there is a political leadership dimension where you're elected, and there's a point where you're appointed,
Yes.
to be involved or probably join the civil service structure or be an advisor to a political leader and so on. Obviously, it is extensively documented the percentage of young political leaders that we have currently. Now, can you rate the inclusion of young people in government in the other side in terms of their inclusion in the bureaucratic system and their influence within that system?
Wow. When you, to be honest, I think this question even came up in the last session that we had. I think the literary digital discussion we had about like last week or 2 weeks ago, when I forgot his name, but how he was saying that young people should enter the civil service because the civil service in itself is really, really corrupt, and we need credible young people that are able to, revamp the entire sector. So first of all, the first question, I'm sorry, I'm just going to give a very funny short story. So I was in my kitchen the other day, and then someone, an older lady, had a discussion with me. So she was asking me, where do I work? I told her, where do I used to work, rather, because I had just moved to Abuja. Then I told her, oh, I used to work for a private organization. And then she now said, oh, where are you working at? I told her that I work for a non-profit. She now said, oh, you're not working for the civil service, that she likes me, that the people apparently in the civil service they just go there because they are lazy, it's not the place to work, etc, etc. But that in itself is a perception of how people see the civil service. A lot of young people do not want to go into civil service. I speak for a lot of young people that I do know, me being one myself. They say, I served in the Ministry of Justice in Ibadan for a year, practicing criminal litigation. And believe me, it wasn't a pleasant experience for me. The systems that were put in place were terrible. It's not where a young person like me would say that I want to stay here and grow my profession or grow in capacity. It's not even the best place to be. So you tell a young person, go to the civil service, etc, etc, etc. They don't see it as a viable option. They see it as a last resort. It's not somewhere where I want to be, because my potentials, everything that I have, will just go to waste, because you'll just be there from morning to night carrying somebody's files and doing things that don't exactly matter in the whole scope of what you intend to do with your life. But we young people eventually do. So as against this backdrop or this explanation I have given, to be honest, the representation there on its own, it's low. To be honest, it is. But there is a need, because we can't just say that we are pushing for young people to enter the political system in itself. We want to elect young people to run, to change things, without also focusing on the civil service itself, the bureaucracy, and the amount of corruption that goes in. Because to be honest, there are some levels of stealing and corruption that you will do that you cannot do with the collaboration of the PEMSEC. And it's a very, very obvious thing. So yes, we do, the representation on both angles are quite low. And we do need to push young people or enlighten them on the need to also enter that sector. Because if you just focus on the political side of things, you will be doing us a service, but you will not be solving holistical sense of it, because it is not just the executive arm. You also have to look at the other arms as well. It's a corruption or the lack of a good government. It's not just a problem that is secluded to one part. It affects all sides of the country, all organs of the country, all the agencies, the services, etc. It affects everything. So if we need to solve the problem itself that affects everything, we need to get people that can do the right job and have some level of integrity into everything, not just one side of government. So I hope that works.
That Mr. Jude, are you still here? Yeah, so I will just let this conversation sleep because it was a critical context that the Basaki laid for us, that let's understand that there is young people's inclusion and engagement in the system. There's a political dimension, which is election, and there's that dimension of you actually being involved in government parastatal. Then in my mind, I'm like, which is much more important in the real sense of it? Would you rather have more young people within the civil service structure or the parastatal or infrastructure of government, or would you rather have more young people run that rat race of joining via political office when it seems that the structure and the system is set against them? But continue from where Nafisa stopped. What do you think about not only representation in the civil service structure? How essential is the importance of young people getting involved or getting appointed or getting interested in the government infrastructure, probably the civil service system and so on?
Sorry,
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Great. Thanks for the question. And apologies for the technical hitch. I think I want to reiterate the point that being young should never be a criteria to be in government, be it civil service, be it electoral position. I don't think that helps anybody. So it shouldn't be a criteria. So, but I'm going to flip this conversation a bit, and pardon me if this sounds a bit crazy. The whole idea of asking for the involvement of young people in government, the technical government, which is the civil service, and the political government, which is the elected officials, is that it affords them the opportunity to understand how government works. It provides a platform for mentoring. It provides a platform for, understanding the dynamics of government. And implicit in this assumption is that there are some positive values. There are some minimum threshold of decency that young people can learn by them being involved in government. If I may throw the question back at you, what kind of mentoring will a young person get in the kind of politics we play now, in the kind of civil service we have now? If we keep insisting that young people should go in here to learn, what are they learning? Because this is a good example of having a seat at the table, but this is the damn crooked table. So why are we interested in having young people play this game or enter in the civil service on the terms of an already existing structure of corruption, nepotism, and incompetence? So that's why I said I'm going to flip this a bit. So the question then becomes, shouldn't young people be going for the leadership so they can change this system from the top, rather than going through the ranks where they might come out being groomed to be as bad as the people on top? And for emphasis, this is me playing the devil's advocate. The second point is the example of all the so-called young people who have entered politics, the political government, and the horrendous performance they have shown. Because if you look at the number of governors in 1999 who were under the age of 40, there were many of them. What kind of platform, what kind of politics did they play? What did they leave behind? I'm not sure it is something I want to learn. So my question, therefore, is, and I mean, this is a conversation. How do you revise the game? How do you change the content of this relationship between young people and the state? I would argue, and I submit very strongly, that if the content and the context of that relationship remains a situation where the current structure is allowing young people a space at the table, we will only produce young people as bad as they are. So something has to change in that dynamics of relationship. I don't know what it is, but I'm not sure I'm going to put my own child to go and get mentored in this kind of government or in this kind of politics.
If I can add, Usman, if you don't mind, you know, I want to take Jude on that because I think it's actually very important. You know, I'm you know, I wish that Samson Itodo was also here, because it would have been really interesting to hear his perspective on the not too young to run process and the movement that they're now starting as far as, you know, ready to run, and some of the questions that they're asking. I think, you know, to the values question. So actually, I would think that the values question goes both ways. You know, the values question. So Jude, before you joined, I was talking about pragmatic and values focused change that need. You know, some of the points that you make about ethical leadership and visionary leadership, you know, one would think about those as values perspectives, you know, in as far as what needs to change in government. And I think the question of values does not just reside in the present political system, it also resides in the young people themselves. Because as you know, as far as participation is concerned, some of the key arguments that are made are around the question of innovation. So it's actually it actually goes beyond presence. It also includes, you know, the ideas around innovation and agency of young people. And it's the idea that, you know, young people will bring a certain type of change, whether it's change in the types of policies that are made or change in the types of investments that are made. So I guess in some sense, the question that I would add to your list of questions is, do young people possess those ethical, you know, values that are required to provide effective leadership? You know, so qualities, assuming that they do, then one could say that, you know, it would be fine to expand the space for young people, because presence, you know, in some ways, presence is the first step towards achieving substantive change. Presence is not the change itself. Presence is one way to get to substantive change. So if the young people bring these values that are required to provide, you know, political leadership that will lead to advancements in society, then, you know, it would be useful. I think the second thing is about innovation, and it goes actually both with the civil service and political leadership. Because as you know, the people who actually write policy and strategy in government, even as it is today, are the people in the civil service. You know, they are the ones who draft the policies, they are the ones who draft all of those things. Sometimes they work with consultants, but a lot of times they draft those things. And the question is, do they, if young people were to come to the table, whether in politics or in civil service, do they actually bring innovation? You know, and I was just in the panel on climate change, and it actually bothered me that a lot of the ideas that were being discussed they almost look like copy and paste. They haven't been properly interrogated. So one person, for example, was talking about, you know, the whole question of greening and saying that we don't need to industrialize, you know, that's my paraphrasing of what the person was saying, that we don't need to industrialize because it's harmful to the environment. You know, why don't we take a step back and really critically look at some of these questions that are being asked globally and whether they're relevant to us? So in some sense, bringing innovation to government, for me, it's a question of technical capabilities, you know, that people need to bring with them based on a clear understanding of what direction the economy should go, what direction our pragmatic development in terms of social investment, in terms of infrastructural investment, in terms of deepening our democratic systems, what direction the country needs to go in all of those. If people, young people, can bring those competencies to interrogate some of those key development questions that confront the country, then I'm all for, you know, youth representation and participation and presence. But presence, but being young in itself, as you've all said, doesn't necessarily qualify a person to be in political office. I mean, one last thing, the literature on, you know, this idea theory actually talks a little bit about symbolic representation, which, you know, in some sense aligns with the idea of agency. Give people a chance to show that they can do something. But, you know, in the places where this has been applied to the gender question and women's representation, the results have at best actually been mixed. You know, that you haven't had necessarily big substantive change in places just because more women got into political office. And I think in some sense, you would find that across the board, there are a lot of young people who are in political office at councillorship level, at the level of commissioners, at the level of, you know, governors, maybe not governors, but at the level of commissioners, houses of assembly. There are a lot of those who are actually within the youth age range. And the question is, how have those people actually been able to justify, you know, the basis for the advocacy, innovation, agency, and change in specific political dimensions? I don't think that change has necessarily happened in the way that we've expected. So the question is, why do we need to advocate these positions, you know, if they're not necessarily contributing to political change in the way that we expect?
This is quite significant.
Usman, can I add one more thing?
Okay? Before he has, I'm gonna, because you raised a question and the Basaki also trade back the other way now. To justify what the Basaki said, I work with a policy think tank, and we don't work with elected officers. We work with the civil service structure. We work with government agencies, and then we set up technical committees or technical anchors to work with most of these agencies, and then we realize the quality, the technical capacity of the guys that are within the civil service structure. And usually the conclusion at that level is what is submitted to the political appointee or to the elected official to conclude on. For example, I won't mention name, there was a certain ministry that we did a document for regarding a change in strategy. And, you know, at the end of various committee meetings and technical gatherings, we realized that within the civil service structure, there was a pushback. And when they changed the document, they presented it back to the minister. And in a way, there was little he could do about that. So, and there was little we could do because we couldn't engage the minister directly. Even if we do, there are certain standards or set rules within that system. Establishing what Mark says about technical capability, and if young people are not competent enough, you know, even if they have to join through political offices, that may be just adding mind to the questions that you may want to quickly address. Osi, you're welcome.
Hi.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Sorry for. Can anybody hear me though?
Yeah, I can hear you. I know others can hear you as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm so sorry for joining late. I had issues trying to just navigate the entire thing. So I've been following and listening to everything everyone has been saying, and I think it's a fantastic opportunity for we as young people to just come together and talk about these things. First of all, though, I think that, you know, a lot of young people in Nigeria have this sense of we need to, you know, government must constantly make what's it called right now, and arrangement for young people to be in governance, and young people are unlocking the prospects of you know, better government. And I always have this school of thought that says excellence in governance has nothing to do with how old you are or how young you are. It's what skills are you bringing to the table? Do you understand? What experience do you have? Do you get? And what have you done prior you coming into government as well? All these things need to be, you know, constantly, you know, put forward, because we hear, oh, you're setting up the cabinet and everything. We need 20 slots for young people. You're doing this. We need blah 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 for X amount of people. Because at the end of the day, all we are looking for is for people who are Nigerians to come together, you know, with a common goal to make sure that the country is working for anybody, irrespective of gender, irrespective of age, and irrespective of irrespective of social class or anything. And I also do believe that yes, there are a bunch of political leadership or people who are in governance right now who started young. Yes, an opportunity should be given to young people to actually get in. But the fact that to get on the table, you need to be able to demonstrate that you have the the skills to be able to deliver. Not just because you shouldn't have a seat at the table just because you're a young person, basically. Now, with the not too young to run, bill that everybody's pushing, and with the fact that it's gotten a lot of talk around the the National Assembly, and at a lot of levels, I believe that what are we as young people? What are we doing right now? Like in Lagos, for example, we have local government elections coming up next year. So I've not still seen anything going on. I've not still seen, young people mobilizing themselves. So I do believe that it doesn't actually have to be via appointments or wait for you to say, okay, come and join this think tank or come and join this government agency. What are you doing as a young person to be able to galvanize, the little circle of influence that you have? Councilorships, local government, local government areas, everything. Those are the ways that we can be able to start to build, political structure. So, okay, when this guy was a councillor, he was able to push this. When this woman was a local government chairman or chairperson, he was able to do this. So these are the things that would actually point us out as young people that, okay, with the little that we've been able to, galvanize towards ourselves, we're able to achieve X, Y, Z. So until we start to take ourselves serious and start to get into the various political arenas, trying as much as we can to be able to just organize ourselves and just, put our best foot forward, I think we're still going to be saying not young to run, and nothing is really to be changed.
Brother, thanks so much. Mr. Jude, you want to quickly respond to the earlier questions or queries?
Yeah, thanks. The reason why I raised those points is to underscore three things. One is that the usefulness or the contributions of young people in government must be viewed in the context of the existing rot in the system. So beyond just wishing that young people should be more involved in government, we have to also think critically about fundamental reforms of our governance system, both the technical government, which is the civil service, and the political government.
Yes.
Because I think that is really, really important. And I think that Dabasaki's points underscore the fact that you can have good people in the service, but there is no space for them to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And if that is the case, then it becomes pointless actually for them to be there. So I want to reemphasize that point about reforming the technical and political government to allow young people to come in. Secondly, amongst the young people who clamor for political and technical participation in government is also a notion and understanding of the national cake. And that is the fact that there's something to be gained here if I'm in power. So it is not, for some people who are clamoring to have a seat at the table, it is simply so that they can get their own share. Which also goes to the point that Basaki made about the value system that young people are bringing to the table. It is a worrying value system, given what we see across the country. And the question then is, what are we doing as a people to begin to build a crop of progressive young people who can go into government and make the change from the inside? And then the final point I want to put on the table is that there is no nation that can succeed without starting this intergenerational handover. That's what I call it. The intergenerational handover. It has to be deliberate. It is not something that happens by accident. It's not something that happens by get us some young people to be in this committee. It is something that's rooted in the organic plan of the nation's development, that we are building a crop of leadership, a crop of young leaders who will take over because they are good. Without that kind of deliberate and conscious effort on the part of the Nigeria state, we will keep running into the problem where the representative of the demographic of young people will be the same characters that we are trying to replace. And that will be, in my view, jumping from the frying pan.
Can we still, is it only me? Can you hear, hello?
Yes.
Something is trying to get
Yes.
in.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Osman.
Hello?
Hello, yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
We can hear you. I'm not sure he can hear us.
Let me type it in the chat.
No?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello?
Go ahead. Nafisa, you had a point. I think you can go ahead with your point. I'm not
Okay,
sure what's
okay,
going on.
okay. I think Mr.
Okay,
Jude is...
I don't think he can hear us, but I
Okay.
just wanted to say something
So-
a bit from my perspective. Training this week by the Gen said, basically on the Young Women's Political Leadership School for women who intend to run for office in the nearest future. And I just wanted to sort of like bridge the gap of theory and literally what, happens in reality a bit. So, first of all, you're a young woman, you want to enter politics. The first place you even think of is, where do I start from? Because to be honest, a lot of young women do want to, I'm talking about young women because it's the demographic I'm most familiar with. And even young people in themselves, they want to do something, but they don't even know where to start from. You get text messages from different young people across the country saying, I want to do this for my country, but I don't know where to start from. I don't know who to go to. I don't know who to talk to. And if there was one, I like what Mr. Jude said about the intergenerational mentorship, because I think it's a huge problem right now that we have, at least within our generation. We even had a session like that during the Gen 10 political leadership when we had the APC woman leader come and speak to us to sort of bridge that gap. There is no sort of mentorship, there is no sort of discipleship right now that goes on within the generation that has declared itself not too young to run and wants to occupy political spaces, and the generation that has then gone into office and proven to be successful in some measure. So that's one. We're having a discussion, where do we start from? The facilitators are like, go and start from the grassroots level. And then you go to another mentor in the political sector who is in PDP, and she's like, do not even try going to the grassroots level. It is a system of organized crime. So if there's one thing I have noticed, even from the EndSARS movement, the aftermath of everything that's gone on, the high-ranging energies that we have a lot of disjointed young people all across the nation that actually do want to do something. But there are a lot of isolated movements with the good intentions, but it's how to harness all that. Because once you have disjointed, tiny movements all around the entire country with good intentions, but you're not able to harness it to accomplish a particular goal, there's a problem. So there's just, the young people are there, but it's how to harness them into, how will I put it, a system that we can then actualize some measure of political change come 2023 and in the nearest future. I just wanted to drop that in.
Okay, sorry, please, can I just also just chip in something based on what we said?
Okay, so I can hear you. Can you guys hear me now? I think I was having issues with my internet.
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Osman.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can hear you.
Go on,
yeah,
also.
We can hear you now. Okay, yeah. So Mr. Jude raised a very salient point, and I just wanted to just buttress on that as well. But basically, based on what I've been able to see and what I've been right now, what I've been observing, we have a lot of young people that are not interested in the in anything politics in Nigeria. So they just see it as they are not. It's something beneath them, and they believe that politics should be joined by people who have maybe no future, no ambitions, nothing. So they just believe that then, like, when it comes to politics, it's not something I should be interested in. They're not getting involved in in any sphere. Miss Nafisa actually just mentioned how people can actually get involved and volunteer. Most young people are not doing that as well, and they have no clear understanding of the political system. And they also a lot of young people also need to understand that a lot of key political positions are mostly given to party members, people that worked, for a political party to actually win elections. It's not just a Nigerian thing. It's just like in the UK, for instance, you have the Conservative Party winning elections. The members of cabinets will eventually come from that party as well. Sometimes they reach across the aisle. Sometimes they, what's it called right now, they look for outsiders. But most times, most of the key roles actually go to party members. So they need to understand that for you to be able to make impact and get involved, you actually need to be, you need to join a political. And also, if you are standing on the and you're saying the ideologies of this party or the ideologies of the system needs to change, and they need to understand that the only way you can actually just change the system is actually to change it from inside. And what's the word? We also need to volunteer, work for free, volunteer to work on campaigns, volunteer to work on policies, just volunteer. So you have a front row seat as regards how this process is, work, how to be able to get things done. And when you look at what's the word right now, setting people who later became big political names, they started off as local government chairman here, special assistants here, volunteers on campaigns. So what's the word right now? We actually need to just go back and actually start to volunteer as well. So also look beyond Twitter, because Twitter most times can be an echo chamber, and a whole lot of people see Nigeria as just Lagos. So people need to understand that society exists outside of social media. Just go out to the grassroots, reach out to people, and try to be able to cultivate people that we think we have influence over, and little by little our foot into whatever political system we want to get into and make.
Well, thanks for that. Debasaki, where does civil society come to play here, especially given the thing OC had talked about regarding young people getting involved in activities at lower levels, party activities, and the likes of it. Like Mr. Jude said before he left, there are structural and institutional issues that makes it difficult for most young people to get involved in politics. So where do you think civil society come in, especially in that aspect of reorientation and reinventing of new values,
Yeah, I mean, I think there are different things that civil society organizations can do. So if we think about civil society organizations across the board, so if we think about NGOs, labor movements, to some extent religious institutions, there are different roles that all of these entities that fit within civil society can do. One is obviously advocating that the platform is created, which is what I think the Not Too Young to Run process really did successfully, to campaign for the creation of the platform to enable presence. So I guess that's one kind of effective thing that civil society can do. Of course, the other bit is more tilting towards what Jude was saying earlier in terms. Again, to Jude's question, we make the assumption that there is technical capacity within civil society organizations or all civil society organizations to provide the type of mentorship that is needed to facilitate political change. It may exist in some places, but there's also the question of to what extent does that kind of capacity to really influence young people's thinking in thinking about transformative change, to what extent does it exist or reside in the current crop of civil society organizations that we have? So but in any case, that's one role that civil society can play in terms of providing mentorship, supporting young people to really think beyond the box and challenge the existing political paradigms, and look at what innovative change they can bring to the table. I think the last thing that I would say as far as the role of civil society is really to challenge the systems that exist at the moment. Again, going back to what Jude said earlier, if the system remains the same, in some sense, it's going to be really challenging to be able to facilitate, any kind of political change. Because what happens now is, and OC was saying that everywhere else, you have political leadership is based on some kind of affiliation with the ruling political party. In some sense, when you think about some aspects of the leadership system, those don't necessarily have to be based on party affiliation. Actually, I think there's some of those that are about seniority in the civil service and what have you. And unfortunately, what has happened is that we have an ingrained system of corruption. So even when you have progressives take political office, it's based on this system of corruption that makes sure that any progressive ideas that they have don't see the light of day. So I think in some sense that civil society's role would be to really challenge the status quo and seek ways to make sure that the system itself is revised in a way that enables innovation to be brought to the table, and that people's critical thinking is giving the space to flourish in the political leadership system in the country.
Everybody, how do we build a movement out of this? How do we build a movement out of this? A movement of enlightening young people about the need to develop capacity so as to function well in politics or in governance, not exactly because you're young. A movement of how to develop social capital. Because for you to actually contend in the political system in Nigeria, you need a level of social capital. I don't know the number of people that know me in my community, but it all boils down to the level of influence. It all boils down to social capital. How do we build a movement out of this? Osi, you want to start quickly?
I believe that the only way to be able to build movements is by getting involved. Little things like your estate associations, showing up by your local government town hall meetings, volunteering to do little things like clinics, food drives, and showing up to help the people who clean around or anything. So because like you rightly said before, because before you can be able to put yourself forward, that you need to be able to contest political office, you need to show people around the community that you want to actually just maybe represent or anything, need to know who you are and need to be able to trust you that, oh, okay, we've seen what you've been able to do in the future, what you've been able to do in the past, so we can be able to rally around you and give you an opportunity for you to be able to represent us. And if you feel like, okay, maybe you don't have too much social capital or even monetary capital to be able to run for office, you can join the civil service and rise up the ranks and be in a position whereby you can be able to influence policy and also do your own little bit as well.
Join the civil service. Okay, Nafisa, I'm listening. Hi, Nafisa, are you there?
Yes, I am. Joe, I was just thinking about your question. Basically, how can we create a movement that borders on competency as against other things? Okay, so I'm going to describe it a bit like this. In my book, where I can't remember whether it was one article where I basically described the issue of having an electorate and having politicians on the other side to a simple analogy of demand and supply. And I was trying to describe in that book that it should not be the manufacturers telling you what you need. It really should be you telling them what they need to make for you to satisfy whatever need or urge you have. Like, for example, you want to create a type of trouser. These are trousers that feel comfortable for you. And then a manufacturer creates bell bottoms, which are entirely not what you need. So I feel like it starts from political and civic education, whereby we teach the young people themselves that you do not vote people without any sense of competency. You just don't vote them because it's something I did when I was doing my NYSC and I was going around the secondary schools in Ibadan doing some measure of political and civic education for about 4 weeks in each school. So I taught them things on tribalism, nepotism, unity, etc. And the factors on which we should base our voting decisions. You just don't vote someone because it's from your town or from your local government, or the person is young or the person is a woman. Yes, those are all things, indicators. But you vote someone on the basis of their competence and integrity and what they are bringing to the table. Where there is a demand for competent, value-based leadership, you will have no option but to supply the kind of leaders that meet the criteria for which you're looking for. So if we on our own do not vote competent people, we rely on tribal and ethnic sentiments to vote the people that we want into power, we will keep on getting leaders that are not of the top, are not the best kind that we need for this nation. So I think a lot of effort has to go into political and civic education, teaching the electorate that these are the factors on which your voting decisions should be made on. I think when we have fixed, it's just one aspect of the entire thing. But I think when we have fixed that, or we are on the road to fixing that, then we're fixing the other problem itself. Because they'll be like, okay, party says these young people, this is not what they want. They don't want someone from we need someone that has the skills, and they will source the skills because they will source for a person that has the skills because they want to win the election. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, but yes, I think civic and political education is very, very integral and important against the backdrop of 2023, 2027, and however, an unempowered, unenlightened electorate, I think, is the biggest danger to democracy, apart from the fact that we have very, very bad institutions. If your electorate is not empowered with the right knowledge and requisite knowledge to make the right decisions, then we're in a lot of trouble.
Interesting conversation we had so far, and let me allow all of you to just give a few seconds parting shots. Debasaki, let me start from you.
Thanks, Usman. So I think, it's important that all citizens of Nigeria are given an opportunity to participate in the political space and bring their perspectives to the table. But at the same time, it's important that, from the point of view of political leadership, we are making sure that we are bringing people to the table based on the capabilities and competence that they bring and in their ability to actually contribute to positive change.
Thanks, Debasaki. Osi?
Yeah, we should have conversations like this constantly, so a lot of young people can be able to get more enlightenment as regards how to get involved, what needs to be done, and also older folk as well as regards how to also, mentor and bring up young leaders that will be able to take over from where they started as well. So I'm looking forward to having more conversations like this, and also looking forward to more young people getting involved so we can be able to change our system and bring about a country that works for everybody.
Yeah, we're here. Nafisa, let's hear your parting shot.
Well, my parting shot is to all the young people that are probably in this session and listening to what we're saying. I see that there are plenty ways to get involved in the political system of our country. Like Mr. Osi said, whether it's, to be honest, one of the most important ways for us to get involved as young people, number one, through community development projects. Number two, through joining in political party. Even if you're not going to contest in, nationally, but contest internally, volunteer internally, prove to be relevant and a person of value within that political party. We need to learn how to make ourselves relevant within the current structures that exist and bring the right values into the structure. The system that we have, because it was, it was intended for it to be bad. It's just because we have the wrong set of people right there that are putting out the wrong values and endangering our institutions. So please, we need to get involved. I know there are a lot of young people who have the intention to get involved. So we just need to harness your energies and position you, right? We need to position you for leadership within these structures. Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys. This is a quite interesting conversation. We can't exhaust it. I thought I know so much about the various dimensions of the not too young to run and getting young people involved in governance, but you all had different enlightening dimension. I love the way that Basaki break it down and then talk about civil service and service. Civil service involvement, as well as how civil society can drive this conversation, and then how we can build a social movement out of this. You know, OC was much also more practical by letting us know how we can be involved on the street, even as low as the local government level, how we need to develop interest in this. And thanks so much, Nafisa. I mean, that dimension you bring was also amazing, and how practically you've been involved in how these are going. I hope we all realize that it is beyond whether it's important that young people get involved in governance. It's also important that we develop capacity, get involved in everything we do around us, and hopefully we can get the kind of change that we want. Thanks so much, OC. Thanks, Nafisa. Thanks, Debostake, for being involved. Thanks so much. Bye, guys.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, and bye.
You're welcome. Yeah.